Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dan Wynn again, and I'm here with a very special guest, um, owner of 5 Wingstop locations up in the San Jose area, also co-owner of Mavens Creamery, a Shark Tank winner, and a co-founder of OmniBev, a Vietnamese coffee drink that is just coming out here. So, hey, Tony Lam, thank you for joining us.
No, thank you, Dan, for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and one of one of the places that we met was through Asian Hustle Network.
That's
And,
correct. Great
and
network.
yeah, and for the listeners who don't know what it is, it's kind of an organic Facebook group that has grown over the maybe about 6 months to over 30,000 members.
That's right.
And it's unbelievable how fast this group has grown. I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, no, it's been a great journey. I met a ton of people through the Asian Hustle Network, so been able to expand my network by meeting with people, in that group. So I'm glad that we were able to sync up and meet, one on one and meet each other through that group. So some very meaningful relationships that I've been able to form through that network. So.
Yeah, and then thank you for reaching out to me. And you came down to Orange County, and we spent a little bit of time together. And when you told me your background and your journey all the way through OmniBev, I wanted to share your story with a lot of my listeners, because I think there's a lot of valuable lessons in what you've gone through all the way up to now. But before we get there, can you share a little bit about yourself and before you got into Wingstop and Mavens and OmniBev?
Yeah, so I'm the one of the, I shouldn't say typical refugee family, but it's coincidence that today is 45 years ago today. The fall of Saigon is when my family and I fled Vietnam to go on a boat, and we were refugees, and our campsite was in the Philippines. We were sponsored by a Catholic charity group that brought us over to Southern California. So for a good 4 or 5 years, that's where my family grew up. And we eventually traveled up to the Bay Area, and I've been in the Bay Area ever since then. So over 40 years. So, I went to school, lived in a poor neighborhood, didn't let that bother me too much. But growing up poor, learning the hard way that with hard work, I knew that one day, something special would happen. Right? I just didn't know what. Now, my parents were, they were very, how do I say, very supportive. There was no high expectation, so to speak. Of course, any parent would love to have their son or daughter be a doctor or dentist growing up, but I never felt that pressure. They never really pressured me to go into that field. So when I graduated high school, I went to college at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, where I majored in business. My concentration was management information system. It's a combination of like computers and business. And when I graduated from college, I had 4 job offers waiting for me back in '97. So this is when the internet was just about taking off. I remember teaching HTML to students back then, and Netscape 1.0 was the most common browser on the market. So yeah, I got to experience the internet revolution at the very beginning during that time. And out of the 4 offers, I look back on, I had an offer with HP, I had an offer with Coopers and Lybrand, which is a big 6 accounting firm. And then it was another one called Hewitt and Associates, another consulting firm. But the one that I ended up working for or selecting was Cisco. So I selected Cisco Systems, which is a large networking company. They make the routers for the internet. Worked in various roles there. And while I was at Cisco, I always had an itch. I was a business major. I want to have my own business. I just didn't know what it would be. right? And one of my coworkers, said, "Hey, my husband and I just came back from Texas. We went to this wing joint. It's called Wingstop, and you should really look into it. And they don't have that many, out on the West Coast, but Tony, you should think about it, right?" And so I didn't have any restaurant experience, in this whole thing, but I said, you know what? Let me check it out. This is interesting. So there was one in the entire Bay Area, only one location in the entire Bay Area. And we went to my partners at that time, or still current partners. We went there, we tasted the food and fell in love with it. And we said, you know what, we might be onto something. And so I started, I got all excited, start telling my friends and family about it. And they looked at me and they said, Tony, I'm not so sure about this investment, because I don't see myself eating wings as a lunch meal or as a dinner meal with my family. If anything else, I would only eat these wings that you're talking about at, like a party function, right? Not so much as a meal. So of course, I got a lot of different feedback, opinions from other people. We went to corporate, told them about our background, they knowing that we didn't have any restaurant experience, they still took a chance on us. They gave us a territory. They said, we want you guys to develop 5 locations in the Bay Area. So while I was at Cisco, I was also opening up Wingstop. This is my moonlighting, gig while I was at Cisco. And so once I had the 5 location up and running, I was at that point 14 years into Cisco at that time. So I got involved with Wingstop roughly about 9 years into Cisco. And then once we had all 5 stores in those 5 years, I had an opportunity to kind of, I wouldn't say fall back on, but I had some passive income coming so that I could take on, some other projects. So that opportunity came, left Cisco, focus on Wingstop. But before I should tell you the story. I tell all the entrepreneurs, like, the first store that when we opened was not easy going. We actually lost, people will tell you that 90% of the restaurants failed, right? And our very first store, we lost $100,000. And, we were going to be like, I was like, man, are we going to be one of those statistics, the 90% that fails with opening a restaurant? And so we went back and we said, hey, I'm not sure we're going to open all 5 of them if every single one of them is going to lose this type of money. So for the second location, we chose I consider an A location. So in business, they teach you, the 4 P's, right? So product, price, promotion, and place, AKA location. So we selected an A location that had an anchor store. What was it? Costco was our anchor store. And because of that, we saw more traffic than the first store. So we were very profitable the first year going into the business. So we said, okay, we figured it out. We're going to have to spend a little bit more on the rent, but we just got to select A locations when we go into this business. And so now today, all the stores are profitable, but during that time when we were opening each one of those stores, we were profitable in the first year. Okay, so lesson learned. I tell everybody, like, location is very, very important. For retail. Now, again, I had 5 stores, but during this time, another friend of mine introduced me to. You mentioned Mavens Creamery. I got involved with Mavens Cream through a friend. He basically said, hey, I have these 2 sisters that are selling the macaron ice cream sandwich at my shop. And I was like, what the heck? What's a macaron ice cream sandwich, right? And so I looked at the product and I said, wow. So they took the 2 innovative, long-lasting products in the market, which is macaron, and the French macaron, and ice cream. Ice cream has been here over 150 years. And they said, hey, let's remove the cream filling and let's put the ice cream in the middle. So he would purchase 400 units and they would sell out in literally 4 hours.
Wow.
So, we looked at that and said, wow, Gwen and Christine, the founders of Mavens, are onto something. And so I got an intro, I met with them. And, I asked them, what is it that you need for the business? Are you looking for investors? So yeah, they said, we're looking for investors. We're looking for someone who can help get our product into more restaurants. And so I said, okay, well, I have Wingstop, but I couldn't get into Wingstop. There's a lot of it's a pretty lengthy approval process to get any new products in. But for me, it was just knocking on the individual mom and pop restaurants, right, to get in. And so during that time, knocked on about 120 different restaurants, told them this is our product, this is the macaron ice cream sandwich. We'll be able to drive traffic into your store. We have this freezer program where you purchase the freezer and we'll stock, you'll stock it up with our ice cream sandwich. And so we did all that stuff. And that's how we were able to get into 120 locations. Next thing happened was the buyers from Safeway and Wholefoods, they happened to eat at these restaurants that carried our product. And sometimes I believe in fate, and I tell people, like, there's two variables that you can't always control, and that's luck and timing. So you think about it, I did have some competitors, in the macaron ice cream space, and that's one company called Brick. They're known in Korean restaurants. And so the reason why I bring up luck and timing is because these buyers happened to go to a poke shop of mine that carried my ice cream. Had they gone to another Korean barbecue place, they might have said, wow, that is the best macaron ice cream sandwich I ever had, right? Fortunately for us, they went to, the restaurants that carried us. So they tasted it, loved it. And they said, you know what? Why don't we reach out to Mavens and let's see if they want to be carried in our locations. And Whole Foods, Whole Foods was the very first one. And Whole Foods, we met with the C-level executives. They tasted it, they loved it. But then they said, hey, I would like to see your ingredients list. And so when we showed it to them, they looked at us and they said, we're sorry, but we can't carry your product. So we were kind of bummed about it. We're like, well, why not? Well, because the ingredients that you have, we're not allowed to sell to our customers. I'm like, what ingredients are what specific ingredients are you referring to? Well, you have artificial flavor, you have high fructose, So we said, oh, okay. But they said, we love your product, but if you could come back and you could remove this and come up with a better product and take it back to us, we'll consider it. So we went back for 6 months. Gwen and Christine, my two partners, they did some R&D, changed the recipe. We came back with an all-natural macaron ice cream sandwich. So we brought it back to them. They tasted it. They loved it. So they said, yeah, we would love to have you in our store location. So we got into all the Bay Area Whole Foods during that time. Now Safeway came a couple months later, and came back a couple of months later, and they said, oh, so where are you being carried right now? And we told them, we're in restaurants and we're talking to Whole Foods, but looks like we're gonna get our product approved with the all natural. And they said, okay, well, that's good enough for us. We don't need to go through the whole vetting process. So I got to save some time from that, But like you said mentioned earlier, we're now in 300 locations in the Bay Area. We launched on the East Coast. We're in 11 locations over there, 11 or 12. And then we're going to be going into Texas pretty soon. And while this was all happening, Gwen, our CEO, had a great idea. Her idea was, hey, Shark Tank is going to be at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. and they're looking for people to pitch their product, right? And so I said, okay, that's really interesting. I have an investor meeting in 2 days from now. They would love to hear from you, and have us pitch to raise money. But her and her sister, they were really adamant about like going to the show and
Hmm.
thinking that our product would actually get on the show. Now, don't I'm not gonna lie, I was a little pessimistic too because I was thinking to myself, would they really invest in a macaroni ice cream sandwich, right? But sure enough, they book their tickets. 2 days later, they get in line, they get their bracelet, right, and you get 60 seconds to pitch. Back to luck and timing. We were, when they were pitching, these are not the same judges on TV. These are like the ones that do the vetting process.
Right.
But one of the judges that happened to listen to the pitch was like 30 seconds into the pitch. He was like, "Wait a minute, you guys are the ones that came up with this macaroni ice cream sandwich?" And they said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "You know what? I live in a city called Morgan Hill.
Yeah.
Morgan Hill is south of San Jose by 30 minutes." And he said, "Hey, that local Safeway in my area actually carries your macaroni ice cream sandwich." I said, "Yes, sir. I've actually had it before. It tastes absolutely delicious." So, unfortunately, they didn't get to finish their 30 seconds
He
pitch.
stole all the time.
you know, but back to luck and timing.
Yeah.
Fortunately for us, we had someone that was, that actually tasted our product, had some background with our product. But I mean, by that time during that show, we had already, I believe, we had already hit $1 million in sales already when we were doing the interview process. But I tell people, it's always good to have luck and timing on your side once in a while.
Yeah.
And in this case, we did it. And so, after that, we went through, several more interviews. We got onto the show. We struck a deal with Barbara Corcoran, and we get flooded with a bunch of inquiries asking how can we sell our product at our location and everything, and especially the response that we got from the Asian community, immigrant community, like, wow, you guys, this is like you think about an American dream, because we literally started in a 400 square foot garage.
Yeah.
To now having we now have a factory, but to strike a deal on Shark Tank, that's a dream come true.
Yeah. I remember this episode, and this is before we met, and before I knew you were involved. And obviously, someone of being that's Vietnamese is very a proud moment for for us to see someone like us on TV. And for people like us, it's kind of a common story, right? Vietnamese American. But I think it was so powerful to see that story on national television, where it is an immigrant story. It is an American dream story. Now we get to come and pitch the product that we created here in America.
Yeah.
And it was such kind of like it was such an awesome moment to get that deal, and then seeing one of us on TV.
Yeah. No, it was a proud moment for me and my family. The 4 years of hard work that we put into building the brand and everything. So yeah, and so obviously a lot of people reached out to me saying, hey, I like to one day have that same dream and everything. And so I'm giving them advice and things like that, what they need to do with their product. And I think like one of the biggest advice I tell people is, whatever you do when you're building a brand, you really need to be a good storyteller, and you really need to document the whole journey.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much, for the heck of it. You want to document for the down the road for making for fundraising for your company, right? They want to know how you started and where what your vision is with the company. And so whatever opportunities I have with a product that I am a part of, I'll take photos of it, right, and post it on social media so that I do have that, chronological timeline of, what was happening, with the company. So,
Yeah, and I remember I kind of heard this idea more recently too. It was one, I think it was Gary V, and they asked him like, if you were to do things over again, what would you do? Is actually I would record everything that I did,
yeah.
and I think for the same reason is to document the journey and the business process.
Hmm.
And then similarly, I was listening to someone about content marketing, and a lot of roadblocks a lot of business owners have is like, oh, I'm just stuck out of ideas, right? But what kind of really blew my mind is like, don't think about coming up with new ideas and new content. It's actually just document your journey. It makes things a
Yeah.
lot easier. Hey, today I went to go visit this shop and we're trying to pitch them on
Yeah.
carrying a product, right? Or I'm trying this new recipe, right? These are really easy, easy things to do in kind of the scope of content marketing. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because certainly storytelling is probably one of the most powerful ideas, powerful skills that you can have. And Shark Tank, I think that probably plays a big part of probably doing deals. Is certainly the numbers play a role, but it's the story behind the business, the story behind the product that will probably, all else being equal, probably set someone else from the rest.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So now you're rolling with Barbara Cochran, and now you got this new project that you're working on right now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the latest project I have right now is, again, I like to be involved with, my background, right? And again, it's now that I want to bring Vietnamese coffee to mainstream. And so one of my partners, our story is basically this: Tammy was visiting her uncle, her family relatives in Vietnam, and her uncle owns one of the largest coffee bean plantation in Dalat. And he said, Tammy, I got all this, farm right here of coffee. Can you come up with something that would help get us into the U.S. market? His Most of his coffee is for Vietnam and also more of Europe, on the European side, not so much the U.S. side. And so, Tammy, she has an entrepreneur spirit. She has a beauty brand that called Lexi Beauty that she currently owns today. So very successful entrepreneur, but she was going into a space that she was not very familiar with, which is F&B, food and beverage.
Mm-hmm.
And we got introduced through a mutual friend, and she basically said, Tony, I need somebody who has the experience in the food space, to take my product to restaurants, to grocery stores, through e-commerce. So I said, okay, yeah, this is a really interesting product. So I would be very interested in getting, especially Vietnamese product. People don't know that Vietnam is the second largest producer and exporter of coffee beans. Except for us, we know that, but people don't know that. And so one of our missions is to educate the consumer about Vietnamese coffee. And so we understood that this is not an easy task, because there's, over 150, 160 million people in the U.S., and there's only three of us. How are we going to be able to do that? But, we don't ever have people tell us that it's impossible. We always like to prove the naysayers wrong. And so I got on board with her. We did about 6 months of R&D, and she perfected the Vietnamese cold brew coffee. So we're the very first Vietnamese cold brew coffee with an RTD, ready to drink.
Mm.
Okay? So our drinks will have a shelf life of 6 months. So people are like, wait a minute, doesn't it contain dairy? Doesn't it contain? Absolutely. So the process that we have figured out allows us to keep the shelf life of it. Now it has to be refrigerated, of course, but it allows it to extend to 6 months. So this is a grab and go Vietnamese. We were using real Vietnamese beans from her uncle's farm, right, to make this coffee. She perfected it. We did, a pretty big batch just recently, back in March, and within 4 weeks we sold out.
Mm.
And I know I owe you a case. I'm sorry, Dan. I know you wanted it. I
I went
promise.
back to your website. It's like everything's sold
Yeah.
out, which is like I'm glad for you guys, but I'm angry
I
for
know, I know.
you.
So the beauty about it is I have my list together, so I'll be sending you a case. No worries there. It'll be here in a couple of weeks, but you know, we, you know, our story is this, Dan. It's so beautiful because we were going to launch our product at the first week of March, and as you know, that's when this whole thing started caving in on us. And we were going to go to one of the largest food expo in LA, and obviously it's called the Natural Product West Expo, and it got canceled.
Yep.
We literally got to LA, and then we got this email that said we were canceling the event. We're like, well, what do we do now, right? So again, we don't just sit and pout about it. We said, okay, let's call up everyone's connection. Who do we know in LA? Since we rented a room for 5 days, let's make the best out of the situation. So I ended up meeting, I think I ended up meeting about 30 people on the Asian Hustle Network. Gave them samples of our product. Now they're interested in carrying our product. They posted online about our product. And so that was one of the reasons why I was able to sell out in 4 weeks, is because of that network, people helping one another, and during that time, we had several companies that wanted to carry our product as well. So when this whole shelter in place is lifted, I have opportunities with some large I can't disclose the names, but large social media companies that will be carrying our product. We got some franchise chains also that are looking into carrying us. But yeah, so the e-com side, that's what I was dealt with. I couldn't go to corporate offices. I couldn't go to retail outlets. So the third revenue stream channel was e-com, because everybody's shelter in place. And we were able to successfully sell out, a really proud accomplishment for the company. And this next batch that we're doing, I literally have 30 groups on the wait list right now for it. And just based on my calculation, when that shipment comes in, half of them will be gone already.
Yeah.
And so, we're still learning. We're still learning as a startup company, but we are definitely moving really, really quickly. We were able to successfully raise money during this round as well. So we needed to raise money to fulfill some of these major POs. And, during this time, this is like one of the roughest times, as you can imagine. The stock market had gone down almost more than 33%, right, during this time. So, we had investors, when the market was high, had money ready to, write us a check. And because it tanked, they're like, well, I'm sorry, the market is not doing well anymore. But then we also had the people who had money in the bank, and they're like, well, Tony, the market is at a discount right now,
Yeah.
So, it was like, dang, so we were in a tough situation, but, I'm just happy. We brought in some pretty awesome, smart investors who can help take the company to the next level. I'm just super happy to have these guys on our board to help carry the company, to the next level.
So can you talk about, I think you said OmniBev is the only cold brew coffee, grab ready to drink. Can you tell Alyssa about what the benefits of a cold brew for a product like yours versus, some of the other competitors on the market?
Yeah. So a couple things how we're unique is cold brew versus hot coffee, right? Cold brew is actually growing. It's getting, it's not exactly, how do I say it, at the level of hot coffee just yet, but it's actually growing. The market share for cold brew is growing pretty quickly. And so the process that we do, we take the coffee beans, the roasted coffee beans from Vietnam, and we steep it into, a brewing process of, 20 hours or so. And then we have the concentrate. Now, why do we do this? Because with cold brew, there are some people who are very sensitive to acidity.
Hmm.
With the cold brew, it's less acidic.
Hmm.
That's one thing. The second thing is not as bitter as it is with black coffee, hot black coffee. So that's two things. And when I tell people, well, why do you have to mention Vietnamese coffee? I don't ever hear people saying, I want to have Colombian coffee or I want to have Brazilian coffee, but you're emphasizing, Vietnamese coffee so much. And my thing is, with Vietnamese coffee, the beans, where we get our beans, it's grown in a volcanic, a mineral rich volcanic soil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you could only find this coffee profile in Vietnam only. So when I tell folks, hey, take a sip of this coffee, and I ask them, well, what do you think of it? And they say, wow, that tastes great. I go, okay, well, that's a good thing, because this profile, this coffee profile that you just said that it tastes great, you cannot get the same flavor or taste with Colombian beans, with Brazilian beans, or Kenyan beans. You could only get this taste with Vietnamese coffee beans. So, and then, not and Vietnamese people know that Vietnamese coffee is highly caffeinated,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we use the Robusta beans, which other countries don't use. They use the Arabica beans.
Mm-hmm.
And so with our coffee, we've been able to blend the Robusta with the Vietnamese Arabica beans to come up with our coffee. And so, we perfected it, and people really enjoy the product. That's how we're different.
Yeah. So I noticed you mentioned, you have your partners in this business and in Mavens. Tell me a little bit about, and I'm sure you get pitched about products every day. Like, hey, can you help me with this? What do you look for in the partners that you work with? And then also, what do you look for in the products that you work with? That tells you,
Yeah,
hey, this is something I want to get on board with.
sure. I think, like, for the product, you got to do your due diligence first. Okay. So let's take, for example, coffee, right? When I'm looking at coffee, I'm looking at the total addressable market. We call it TAM, total addressable market, and see how big that market is, right? And then ask people, like, okay, what do we think the sales of this is going to be? Well, I did my due diligence, and Tammy, gave me some of the statistics about coffee, and that is a coffee drinker will drink coffee twice a day.
Hmm.
So imagine if I'm selling this for $3.95, and even if they drink it once a day, it's $3.95 times 365 days a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's the opportunity, right? And so, I tell people not every single product is coffee, but when you do your due diligence, you got to make sure that there is a business model for your product that you could, if you hit these targets, you could actually be profitable, or you could actually, actually make money with it, right? So I'm being very selective when I'm, looking at projects these days, because I want to make sure that, as I get older, like I'm 45 now, that I use my time wisely. I can't be doing 10, 15-year projects anymore like I did with, I've been with Wings. I was with Cisco for 14 years. This year, I'm with Wingstop for 15 years. So by the time I do another 15-year project, I'll be 60, right? So, for the younger generation, they can take some gambles. I get it. I would, but you got to do a business plan at the end of the day. You got to know who your competitors are. An idea is a dime a dozen. I get really tired sometimes when a friend of mine comes up and he tells me, Tony, I want you to open this business with me. I go, what is it? Yeah, we're going to open a milk tea place. I'm like, do you know how many milk tea shops are out there? I love milk tea. I'm one of those guys that drink it every other day, but do I really need to, for someone to open another milk tea concept? And they have to think about, like, your competition.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, at this time, I'm the very first RTD product. Not to say that there aren't going to be more of these guys coming through, but my thing right now is I want to get into 10,000 locations. with this product in the next couple of years. That's my goal. And people are like, how can you do that, in such a small amount of time? Well, with grocery chains, we're talking about grocery chains that have 2,000, 4,000, even 6,000 store locations. You get one of them and you're almost halfway there already, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not telling people it's a slam dunk. By no means is it a slam dunk to get your product into that location, because then you have other problems that you need to resolve, and that is, can you scale?
Mhm.
Right? Even though
Yeah.
you got a great product and you sign all these stores, can you scale, and provide enough product for these locations? And fortunately for us, I have a very strong ops partner. Weston is doing an absolute great job. I mean, we're able to pump 1 million of these a day if necessary.
Mm.
We're at that point.
Yeah.
We're not there yet, but we have the capability to pump 1 million bottles of these per day. So capacity is not an issue for us with this product. Your other question was partners. Like, how do
Yeah.
you decide who to work with? Yeah, I think like I tell people, um, you got to really know your partners, right? And that is, if they're brand new, I'll give you an example. Like Tammy and I, we got to know each other for 3 months before I finally said, okay, I'm comfortable having you as a partner. Let's make this thing, work out. And that is, we had meetings where we talked about the vision. Do we share the same vision? You know, do we share the same process of how we're going to get to that end goal that we both have in common? And do we understand each other's strengths? Because when you build a business, there are four very important positions that I feel you really need to really take off. I mean, I have experience in those four positions, but you stretch yourself too thin if you try to do everything, all at once, if you wear too many different hats. And so for us, she's the CEO. I handle the sales, the marketing piece. Weston handles the operations piece. And then, recently we brought in a CFO who has taken companies public before. So now that you have all four, positions filled, and everybody knows their swim lane, right?
Mhm.
We do what we're good at doing, and we trust each other with that. And so that's the type of conversation, when people put a business together, you don't need to have all four right away, but down the road, you really do need to have that within, I would say, 6 months of forming your company, because they're four very crucial roles,
Mhm.
in a company. So.
So I know you're involved. We talk about Wingstop and Maven and OmniBev, and I know in our personal conversations you're involved with some other projects. So like for you, how do you know it's time to like, hey, this one's running on its own. Hey, let me move on to the next thing. How do you avoid shiny object syndrome?
Yeah, no, it's the thing here is, when I work with these other companies, some of them are just short-term projects, but some of them are ones where I'm more of an advisor. A lot of the companies, as you know, one of the toughest things in a company is getting sales,
Mm-hmm.
and that's my strength.
Mm-hmm.
My strength is getting sales, and so a lot of these companies, because of my network, the saying, your net worth is your network, or I'm sorry, the other way around. Your network is your net worth, right? And so I tell people, whatever you do to grow your sales, you gotta build your network. And the way to do that, this is a really good advice. I wish I knew this 10 years ago, but I found out literally maybe about 2.5 years ago. LinkedIn is literally the number one lead gen for uh, you know uh, meeting people and having conversations and striking deals. That's how I've been able to get into a lot of these locations is through LinkedIn, more so than Facebook, more so than Instagram. It's been using that professional network. And so with these companies that are asking for, my help, um, it's been more like, Tony, um, your niche is in the restaurant food space. It is. And so it's really natural for me to make an introduction. You know, what you don't see is behind the scenes, the big amount of network support that I have, behind me. So all I do is I will, team up or set up a meeting with these companies. And at the end of the day, these guys, the guys that support me will handle the rest, meaning they'll do the paperwork, they'll do the onboarding process. For me, I assist with them here and there with the relationship, right? So not so much like, okay, now that I'm done, you guys, have to go and manage the rest. I'm still involved in that piece, but in terms of time, I've dedicated, anywhere between 8 to 10 hours on some of these projects a week. Um, you'll find out that people find out that I'm a workaholic. I am. My mind doesn't sleep very much. My thing is I enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
More so. If I really enjoy what I'm doing, I don't mind working the 60 to 80 hours. Because it's, for me, I consider it fun. I don't consider it work at all, actually.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I get to, I work from home, right? And so I do have the flexibility. I do spend time with my kids, still, even with my busy schedule. So it's not like I'm not able to balance family and work at the same time. We do go on vacations, not right now because of the pandemic, but we go on like 3 to 4 big vacations during the year.
So let's talk about that, because I know for a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, it's like, hey, I got to put food on the table, and that sometimes means sacrificing. But how do you do specifically like 3 or 4 business vacations? Do you like, hey, you cut off the time at like 6 p.m. and then, spend time with kids, and after everyone's asleep, you go back at it? Do you do something like that, or it's just kind of ad hoc and you says, all right, it's fun time, let's go do something?
Yeah. So, my calendar, everything is my whole work schedule or my whole day schedule or my life schedule is all based on my calendar. So, I will block out 3 hours in the evening, so to speak, for family. So when I have meetings and everything, I tell people, here's my calendar. I use Calendly, right?
Yep.
And so they get to see, what my availability is, and they'll book the time and everything. But yeah, I that's what I do. That's how I manage my time. I think that people have to know how to manage their time, because if you're not good with time management, you're really unorganized and really ineffective. You don't have a tool like that. And I tell people you should get it, because I think it's only like $9 a month, but it stops this back and forth communication. Like, what time are you free this day, that time? Like, here, this is my schedule. You just choose what you're free with. So.
Yeah, I use something similar, Qt, and you scheduled this one. The same thing. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So, we're kind of near the end, but I want to kind of ask you this question. You talked about your Wingstop first location. You guys lost $100,000, and a lot of people see kind of the success in front of the business. They don't see it's not sunshines and rainbows. So can you tell a little bit about that? That maybe that first year you guys lost, and were you guys ready to close the doors? I know you talked about how the second location really kind of turned things around you, but like, talk about that time where you guys were like, hey, I don't know if we're gonna go past this.
Yeah. So we kind of during that first year, it was hard because, again, something I never done before was food. And Wingstop also opens from 11 a.m. to midnight, and we didn't get home till like 2:30, 3 o'clock for a couple of months, because we were just learning more about how restaurant works. And at one point I kept on, I was asking myself, like, gosh, do I really want to do this? It was so nice to have a nice paycheck, right?
Yeah.
You have that stability, right? And now here, you just lost $100,000. So that money that I made at Cisco, just went to paying off the losses for this business. And
Yeah.
imagine now if I had 5 stores in this exact same, position. And so I think that, like I said, after that first restaurant, not gonna lie, I had some doubts. I did had some
Mm,
doubts. Like, I don't think we're gonna, even though we signed up for 5, it doesn't mean that we have to do all 5.
mm,
We could open a second one and say, you know what, we had 2 losses. We're not gonna open the other 3. All we do is we lose our, what we call our franchise development rights, which
mhm,
was at that time like $10,000 a store. So we'll lose $30,000 for not developing it. But the thing is $30,000, that loss right there, worth your time,
mhm,
in doing other things, right? So you gotta kind of weigh that. And so for us, at one point we did almost feel like we wanted to throw in the towel, but I'm glad that we didn't. But you know, people ask me, not all my ventures are successful. I'm fortunate that about, I would say, 80% of my ventures have been successful. The ones that have not been successful, my advice would be sometimes you have to cut your losses. You know, I just went through an investment where it was 3 years of pain of losses, and I could have ended it 2 years earlier. But my wife said, no, I want to give it, a go at it. And I look back at that, hindsight, you like, wow, I could, we lost 2 years because you can never replace time.
yep.
We lost 2 years where you could have been playing with the kids on the weekend, us taking them to birthday parties and things like that. Because she was working on the weekends for that business. It was running a food court, and so hindsight, we had to learn from that, because now I know moving forward, if I'm ever in that situation again, I will cut my losses. And I cut my losses. When I say I cut my losses, I just don't say that after a year let's just quit. I look at it and says, do I truly believe that if we put a little bit more effort or a little bit more time into it, that it can be profitable, right? In this case, I kind of knew, like, there was an opportunity where we weren't going to be profitable, but I should have taken that advice. So at the end of the day, she ended up having to work 2 more years. Kids didn't get to go to birthday parties with their other friends because she couldn't take them, or I couldn't take them because we were both working at that place. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes your time is worth more than the money. So you got to really evaluate that piece
Yeah.
when making that decision.
Yeah. So, hey, thanks again for your time. So we're going to do some rapid fire questions to end it out, and
Yeah,
just answer the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay.
yeah, sure.
All right. So who do you look up to?
My dad.
All right. What's the best business advice you've ever received?
The best business advice I've ever received. Surrounding myself with mentors and positive people.
The best business book you've ever read?
I'm not into reading, so I've done a lot of stuff learn by doing. So I'm a doer when it comes to business. And if I have to learn the hard way, so be it. But I've always been a student for life, and I do things in non-traditional ways, so to speak. Yeah.
All right. If you could do one thing over again, what would it be?
If I could do one thing over again, what would it be? Gosh, I think doing more philanthropy stuff. I think that's one thing that I want to do, and I am getting the opportunity now. But back then, I wish I had done more of that. And when I say philanthropy, it's a combination of giving back to the community, but also mentoring, aspiring entrepreneurs out there. If I had a Tony Lam 10 years ago, you would be seeing, Tony on the beach and things like that. But yeah, I if I were to do things differently, it would be basically mentoring people and giving more back to the community, monetary wise, as well as volunteerism.
Hmm.
That's what I would have done, differently.
All right. And so you You lose everything. The only thing you have is your computer, your cell phone, and an internet connection. How do you rebuild your business in 30 days?
How do I build my business in 30 days? Through social media, through referral, through content marketing. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's the product that you're promoting. You know, the cheapest and the easiest way to reach the most amount of users is through social media, right? And if I had my phone with a video camera, I'll be able to film the product and put a creative up there. Um, and what was the last one? What was the last thing that you said about that? If I was,
Yeah, lose your phone. You lose everything. The only thing you have is
oh,
your computer, phone, and internet. How do you rebuild your business?
yeah. So yeah, with the computer and internet, yeah, that's what I would do.
Okay.
So yeah, use social media
All right.
and referrals.
Referrals.
Yeah.
Yep. And lastly, what's the biggest challenge you have in your business today?
The biggest challenge I have in my business today, I think, hmm, it's a tough one. Wow. You know what? I mean, we're hitting all four cylinders right now with this coffee, and um, gosh, I mean, you're gonna see us in 10,000 stores in 18 months. That's how confident I am. So I have all the pieces together. And we just the one of the biggest hurdles was fundraising, and we got that too. So now that's why I'm kind of like stuttering right now, because I'm like, wow, you know, we've been able to hit all these things. So
I've
yeah,
stumped Tony Lam. He doesn't know what to
I know.
say.
Amazing, Dan.
Well, I mean, that's nice problem to not have. Um,
Yeah.
and you can let me know if you ever figure that one out, and I'll share it with everyone and I'll update this. But if we want to learn more about you, try to get some OmniBev, where can we go?
Yeah, to learn more about me, so I had my own consulting website. It's still there. It's called launchyourfirst.com. So Tony at launchyourfirst.com. And if you want to try our cold brew, our website is www.omnibev, for beverage.com. Okay.
All right. Hey, thank you, Tony Lam, for your time, Mr. All World. And, best of luck with all your ventures. And we look forward to getting some OmniBev in one of your 10,000 stores.
Thank you. Thank you,
All
Dan.
right. Thank you.
Appreciate it.